So focus number two is cross-examination. Um, every debate that the students are going to be in, they're going to have to answer a cross-examination. They're going to have to give a cross-examination. So a difficult skill as well to learn and a useful one to practice. And the main gist of what you push with the students when you're trying to talk to them about cross-examination is what is the purpose of the question that they're asking? There should be some reason why they're asking that question. And that's really a hard concept for students to understand, but you'll see why it's necessary. And there's kind of two ways where cross-examination goes really wrong, especially with younger debaters, but even with more experienced debaters as well, that you want to avoid. The first way cross-ex goes wrong is asking questions just to fill time. This is kind of, especially with novices, they just are not sure what to do with their cross-ex. So, they'll say things like, hey, what was the second thing that you said? They know the second thing that was said. It's the same pack for the whole year that they're debating every round. They're just kind of treading water until the beeper sounds. So it accomplishes nothing, and it doesn't really help them develop their skills in that area. The second way that you'll see cross-ex go wrong is like just mega posturing. The debator gets super hyped. They're really aggressively pushing a point. They're not letting the other team answer. They're rolling their eyes. They're being sarcastic. They say dumb stuff like, is that really what you think? Or, that kind of stuff. And, debaters who do this, you kind of think that you're making the other team look really bad and that the judge is loving it. But in fact, the judge is hating it and thinks you're a jerk and thinks it's not really accomplishing anything. Assertive and subtle is so much better than loud and obnoxious. And it takes a while for debaters to learn this. I'll admit I had a problem with this as a debater, and um, especially when I was a little bit younger, a couple times I lost speaker points because the judge was like, "You just can't talk over somebody in cross-ex. You have to let them answer, and then ask a follow-up question or bring it up in your speech." And uh, things started to get a lot better for me once I learned that, and stop being such a jerk. So, what are some purposes that you can talk to with your students about what they should be trying to accomplish with cross-ex? The main goal of cross-ex should be setting up their arguments. So set up the later arguments that will occur in the speeches. A great way to do that is asking about motivations and trying to discover base incentives for actions. Often will be a really useful way to set up your arguments. Thinking about our novice pack, when cross-examining the 1AC, the students could ask, to say things like, all right, as part of your advantage, you say that Saudi Arabia is going to buy a lot of guns from the United States and use them to promote destructive conflict in Yemen. So why is Saudi Arabia buying so many weapons from the United States? Why are they using them in destructive conflicts? What is the conflict in Yemen all about? And the affirmative will most likely give some answer about why Saudi Arabia is really concerned about their security. They're worried. Maybe they're filled with hatred for the Yemenis. They're locked in a conflict with an enemy. And all of those things help set up some of the negative arguments. So it helps set up the fill-in argument, because if they have desperate security needs or they're fueled by hatred or resources that they want to gain from conquering other countries, then they'll still want guns, and so they'll buy from China or Russia. It solves the root cause because it proves that the security concerns and other interests, they're not the result of guns, they're the cause for why they buy guns, and that those will still exist, and they'll try to get things like 3D weapons, that sort of thing. You can also ask about the motivations of the US too. Why is Trump so interested in selling all these guns? And the answer to that question is most likely either they'll say Trump wants to make a lot of money, in which case it sets up your fill-in argument because China and Russia will want to make a lot of money too, that there's still an incentive for sellers if the market is so good for buyers. Or they'll say something that Trump really wants to support their conflict, he wants to form an alliance with them, or he's just kind of crazy or reckless and likes setting up selling guns, and it makes him kind of be able to feel like he's doing something and dominating the world and that kind of stuff. So if that's the case, that sets up the circumvention arguments because it proves Trump will find a different way than arms sales to accomplish those goals to get those countries those guns. So the point is that you already kind of know what the other team is going to say when you ask the question. You just want them to say it so then you can later reference it in your speech. And that's an important point too. The speech is where the payoff happens. Usually the payoff doesn't happen in cross-ex. And that's something that younger debaters take a while to learn. You don't want the debaters trying to get the Perry Mason moment where it's like, okay, but then the plan doesn't solve, and then finally the person answering the cross is like, you're right, the plan doesn't solve. That's never going to happen. That shouldn't be the goal. The goal is to kind of get an idea in the judge's mind, so then you can reference it in your speech and be like, hey, this is what they said in the cross-examination. Here's why this proves our argument. So maybe you ask like one follow-up question, like, well, if Saudi Arabia is so committed to destroying and conquering Yemen, then why wouldn't they just find another way, even if the U.S. stopped selling arms? And the affirmative will probably give some sort of okay answer, and then you can move on. You've made your point. You don't have to keep following up and badgering them about that. Or alternatively, maybe they give a really good answer, and that's useful information too, because you'll know in your speech what they're going to say and what you have to answer. Or if it's just a really good answer that you don't have a good answer to, it kind of gives you a heads up that that's not a place that you want to bank the round on. You don't want to dig in there if you now know that they have a really good answer to that argument, and you can spend your speech time more effectively by focusing on other arguments where maybe they don't have a very good response. Another thing you want to have them practice is negotiated time in cross-examination. Cross-examination is a weird spot where, um, your speech time is all your time, but cross-examination is sort of shared time, and who gets to spend that shared time is negotiated. So, like I said earlier, you don't want to have the debaters constantly cutting off the opponent right away in cross-examination before they say anything, but you also don't want to let the other team steal the whole cross-examination by just going on and on and on in their answer and using it like extended speech time. So you need to give them time to answer, but if they keep going, you want to have the students practice firmly but politely cutting them off by saying, okay, I understand. I need to move on to next question and something like that. And finding a way to manage negotiated speech time like cross-examination is a really useful skill. A good activity to practice cross-examination is to have the students sit in a circle and have the students take turns going in the middle of the circle and answering the students outside of the circle ask the questions, the student in the middle answers the questions, and then the students on the outside all ask a question and take turns. And it's a great way for the people asking the questions to have an incentive to think up questions, to see the questions that their peers ask, to think about all the kind of different questions that they can ask, and then the person answering has to think through lots of different angles. So always make sure to follow up as well, either directly or after the activity with a discussion of what the purpose of different questions was. So, write down or remember a question that was asked, and you can say, hey, Susan, you asked this question, and then repeat the question. What purpose did that serve? How will that be useful in your speech later? Try to have them maybe come up with a way to reframe it or to change the focus of the question in order for it to be useful. And so that's a thing that you can do for the personal part of it. Why do you like a particular music group or artist better than another one? And then they can all ask questions about that, or they could do it with the pack, like the 1AC, or we can pretend the 1 and C just happened. Now somebody's asking questions about the 1 and C, and those are useful for both activities.